Imagine pulling up to a gas station late at night on a road trip with your daughter asleep at the back of the car. 2 hours away from your destination, suddenly, everything is about to change. A masked man with a gun and a knife runs out of the cashier's office towards you. Panic sets in. You're too scared to move as you can see the gun pointed at you. You think of your daughter in the car, knowing your next decision would lead to consequences. However, within the twinkle of an eye, a power bike drives in. It's Joe Rogan, the legendary podcast king.
Joe Rogan podcast, check it out!
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day!
He drove right into the chaos. What happens next? Stay tuned as we unravel the events of the unthinkable night. The robbery incident at the gas station. It was a long ride for Damien, driving from Chicago to Savannah, Georgia, in his old BMW car to visit his mother and spend Thanksgiving with her. He and his 10-year-old daughter had started the trip as early as 3 a.m., hoping to get to the city by 7 p.m. at most, since it was a 15-hour drive from Chicago to Savannah, Georgia. The trip was long, and they took some breaks in between as his daughter, Melissa, occasionally wanted to take a piss or buy some snacks. However, the car broke down in Macon, Georgia, and it took about 4 hours for them to get it fixed. But determined to get to Savannah, Damien continued with his journey. As he continued with his journey, the roads were lonely, with only a few cars driving past. He looked at his daughter asleep in the back seat and saw the gas meter beeping, indicating that his fuel was low. He needed to find a gas station to refuel. Damien kept driving until he reached Orangeburg, South Carolina, where he saw the faintly lit billboard welcoming him to town. He knew he was 2 hours to his destination. He drove on for some minutes, passing through the deserted road until he saw a dimly lit gas station. He wanted to drive past it, but he knew he needed fuel, so he pulled into the gas station. Damien got out of the car holding his car keys. He searched his wallet for his card, paid for the gas, and used the pump to fuel his car. As he looked at his watch, it was almost midnight. As he fueled his car, he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully. He also needed some rest, but that would be when he got home. Almost done with fueling the car, he turned away and looked at the cashier's office. He saw a masked figure running towards him, pointing a gun at him with one hand and a knife at the other. With the warning not to do anything stupid. Frozen, Damien didn't move. What was he going to do? This was unexpected. Damien stood still. His thoughts went to his daughter in the back seat. There wasn't enough time to run into the car and speed off. He knew he had to be careful with his actions, not knowing what to do. He stood there defeated. Why did he stop here, he asked himself as the robber closed in on him. The robber pushed Damien and held the gun to his neck, threatening him not to do something stupid. As he searched his pockets, taking his wallet and the few wads of cash he had in his pockets. The robber looked at the back seat and saw Melissa sleeping. He pointed to her and asked that Damien wake her. Damien didn't want to wake his daughter. He didn't want her to see what was happening. But the robber would not listen. He pushed Damien away and then opened the door, waking up Melissa while pointing the gun at her. The young girl let out a scream as she saw the gun. Damien stood at the back, hands on his head, as he pleaded with him not to hurt his daughter Melissa. The robber kept pointing the gun at Melissa. She was in tears, crying for her daddy. What seemed like a normal trip was turning into something else. The robber asked Damien to move backwards, and he obeyed as the robber held Melissa close, with the gun pointed at her. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man rides into the station on his power bike with his helmet on his head covering his face and making it hard to see. The robber keeps Melissa close to himself as she keeps sobbing. The robber asks the bike man not to dare ride away or he will shoot Melissa. The bike man obeys the robber's instruction, comes down the bike and removes his helmet. Unbelievable! It was Joe Rogan, the legendary podcast king, the host of the popular Joe Rogan Experience.
Joe Rogan proved how productive potheads can be, creating his own podcast, TV shows, commentating on sports, and releasing comedy specials, bringing his net worth to an estimated $23 million.
What had he walked into? Well, Joe Rogan does as he's told. He takes out the money in his pockets and his wallet and goes to drop it inside Damien's car. Joe Rogan pleads with the robber not to harm the young girl. The robber tells him to shut up and join Damien on the other side. Obeying every word of the robber, Joe Rogan did as he was told. "Now, hand over the keys," the robber yelled at Damien. Damien, disoriented and confused, threw the keys to the floor. Joe Rogan went over and picked up the keys. He then threw it to the robber. Without warning, the robber let go of Melissa as he ran into the car and shut the door to drive away quickly. Well, you won't believe the twist that came next. Unexpectedly, Joe Rogan brought out Damien's car keys and pressed the lock button. The robber was shocked he had been struggling to fix the car keys. Joe Rogan shook his head and walked towards the car. He inserted the key and locked it again as the robber pointed the gun at him. But Rogan didn't flinch. Turns out Joe Rogan had switched keys earlier on while throwing the car keys to the robber. The robber hit the glass of the car hard, but Joe was unmoved. He took out his phone and made a phone call to the police. The robber was held captive inside the car, unable to come out, as the car model was an old one, impossible to open from inside without a key. The robber screamed out in frustration, doing all he could to find a way out. On the other hand, Damien and his daughter had run into the cashier's office as they were scared. With the change of events, the robber began to beg Joe Rogan to let him out of the car. He apologized for his actions and claimed that it was because things were difficult for his family. That was why he acted this way. He also told Joe that the firearm was empty. Joe Rogan said he suspected that already. As they waited for the police to arrive, Joe Rogan began to ask the robber some questions. It was like he was conducting a podcast. He got to know that the robber had 3 kids at home and had promised them dinner as they hadn't eaten well for the past few weeks. The robber had hoped to rob the convenience store, as it was usually deserted. But to his surprise, he met the cashier inside and struggled with her to give him some money. And in the process, she fainted. He was about to leave the store when he saw Damien drive in, and he decided to take advantage of him as he knew there was no one around the area. Rogan watched him explain his actions and understood that the times were hard and that many people were struggling, but he believed that there were better ways to handle difficult situations. Rogan asked the robber for his name, and he introduced himself as Kevin. He then asked Kevin some personal questions and got to know that he was an educated man with a wife and 3 sons at home. Rogan asked Kevin how his sons would feel if they could see him right now. He couldn't say a thing as he was overwhelmed. He burst out into tears. It felt like a movie scene, watching the robber cry. He was ashamed of himself. As the siren of the police grew louder, Rogan asked him for his house address and the names of his sons. Kevin, the robber, pleaded with Rogan to let him go free for the sake of his kids before the police arrived. He sobbed, saying that his family got only him, and they weren't going to survive with him locked away in prison. Rogan listened to his plea, but told him he had brought this on himself, and actions had consequences. Although he sympathized with Kevin, he was going to pay for his crimes, as Rogan didn't believe in letting a criminal walk free without paying for his crimes. Kevin was going to pay for his crimes like every other person. The police arrived and they took Kevin away. Damien and Melissa thanked Joe Rogan for stepping in and acting like he did. Melissa called him her hero, but Joe Rogan laughed and said the real hero was her father. Rogan promised them that he was going to show up in Savannah, Georgia, to celebrate Thanksgiving with them. He took down their address and bid them goodbye. Joe Rogan saved the day, but that's not all. What happened next was beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The next day, Joe Rogan made an unexpected visit to Kevin's house. He met Kevin's 3 sons and wife. They were surprised to see him. Rogan explained who he was and why he had come. He didn't want Kevin's family to suffer because of the mistakes of their father. He promised them that he was going to cater to all of their needs, their feeding, education, clothing, and shelter, and they would never have to worry about their future again. This was unexpected. The family never expected this to happen. They appreciated Rogan for his kindness. True to his word, Rogan supported Kevin's family while their father was in prison. 7 years later, Kevin was released from prison. He was happy to see his family again, and he deeply appreciated Joe Rogan's kindness. A few weeks after Kevin's release, Joe Rogan invited Kevin, Melissa, and Damien as guests on the Joe Rogan Experience to share their story about the unforgettable event that changed all of their lives that night. Joe Rogan's presence in the gas station that night didn't just stop a robbery. His presence did the unthinkable. It brought hope to a struggling family and changed their lives forever. Joe Rogan Philanthropy Acts. It's no news that Joe Rogan has always been a kind-hearted man who has a big heart.
You are a funny man, by the way.
Thank you. You're funny too. Sometimes unintentionally.
And always loves to help those in need. He has always been involved in several charitable acts over the years. Although being a private person in his charitable acts, some of his public acts of philanthropy include giving all he made from his stand-up show for the victims of the Las Vegas shooting. A shocking event happened on October 1st, 2017, in Mandalay Bay Casino Hotel in Las Vegas. A gunman opened fire from his room on a crowd of 220,000 music fans at a concert, which led to the death of more than 50 people and over 100 people injured. Rohan had a show that weekend, but due to the unexpected event, he pledged that all of the money from his stand-up show, which was going to be held at the Terry Fator Theater at Mirage Hotel and Casino, was going to be donated to the GoFundMe. The GoFundMe was created to help the victims of the Las Vegas shooting.
Efforts are underway to help those affected by the shooting. Las Vegas officials have launched a GoFundMe to provide relief and financial support to victims' families.
Another remarkable time was when Rogan matched earnings from a stand-up charity show by another comedian buddy, Jim Jeffries, to benefit the Wildlife Warriors organization. Wildlife Warriors is a worldwide and charity founded by the Irwin family to fund the protection of endangered wildlife. Jeffries raised $80,000 at the charity show, and Rogan matched the amount for a total donation of $160,000. Also, in 2020, when Whitney Cummings, a comedian and friend of Joe Rogan, spoke openly on Twitter about Rogan's kindness towards those around him. However, Rogan loves to donate in private most of the time, as most of his donations aren't publicly disclosed. Moving on, let's explore Joe Rogan's background. Joseph James Rogan, popularly known as Joe Rogan, was born on August 11, 1967, in Newark, New Jersey, USA. He is a well-known podcaster, American comedian, actor.
Joe Rogan went from telling hot girls to eat spiders on Fear Factor to the face of the UFC, winning Best TV Announcer and Personality of the Year 4 times at the World MMA Awards.
Television host and announcer for the competitive mixed martial arts organization Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC. His podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, is well known all over the US, as he's one of the most paid podcasters in the world. Although there are different arguments on his unpopular opinions on current issues by his followers. Rogan grew up in Newark, New Jersey, where he lived with his parents until they divorced when he was 5 years old. Looking back, Rogan described his upbringing with his parents as a tough time. His father was physically abusive and harsh towards him. Hence, he grew up with a fear of his father. However, after the divorce, his mother took him and moved to San Francisco. where she met her new lover and remarried. Rogan and his new family lived in Newton, Upper Falls, Massachusetts, where he lived at peace with his stepfather and attended Newton South High School, graduating in 1985. As a young boy, Rogan developed an interest in drawing and fitness. He started a daily workout routine at age 7, but with time he stopped drawing and focused on fitness, engaging in martial arts. As time went on, he began to practice karate and wrestling as he enjoyed the sport. During an interview with Black Belt magazine, Rogan described his journey through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, and Taekwondo, winning 4 straight state titles and having a successful amateur career. However,
Joe Rogan!
as Rogan continued establishing his career in martial arts, the unexpected happened. Rogan kept on having recurring injuries and chronic headaches that just wouldn't go away. He was faced with a hard decision to make. He chose to quit pursuing a professional career in martial arts. At age 19, Joe Rogan became a Taekwondo teacher at Boston University. Since he couldn't practice professionally, he taught the sport he loved. But Rogan only loved to teach enthusiastic students who shared the same burning desire as him for the sport. Eventually, his desire to teach was soon replaced with something else: stand-up comedy. Rogan's friends always laughed at his facial impressions and jokes and urged him to try stand-up comedy. Their continuous remarks made Rogan move to the next phase of his career. At 21, he performed his first stand-up routine on August 27, 1988, at an open mic night at a Stitches Comedy Club in Boston. This paved the way for him into the world of entertainment. As he moved to New York City, where he became a full-time comedian and made it to Hollywood. In 1994, Joe Rogan signed a contract with Disney, which gave him his first TV role. He became popular for playing Frank Valente in the movie Hardball and playing Joe Garelli on the hit show News Radio, as his relatable and down-to-earth persona made people like him. Over the years, Joe Rogan has made 8 comedy specials on Netflix, including Joe Rogan, Rocky Mountain High, 2014, Joe Rogan, Triggered, 2016, and Joe Rogan, Strange Times, 2018, amongst others. The rise to fame wasn't so easy for Rogan, but his breakthrough came by being a television host on the show Fear Factor. Although he admitted that he only accepted the job because of the financial stability it provided him, making it easy to pursue his stand-up comedy and other ambitions, from Fear Factor, Joe Rogan went on to host The Man Show and Joe Rogan Questions Everything. Whenever he climbed on the stage, his audience always had a good time and enjoyed the show. Rogan's strong background in martial arts gave him an opportunity to join the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, in 1997 as a backstage interviewer. Interestingly, he disclosed on his podcast that he initially did the work for free. However, with his commentary skills and deep knowledge of the sport, he soon became the fan favorite. But he left the organization as he wasn't getting the pay he deserved. However, in 2002, he was persuaded by Dana White, the new president of UFC, to return as a color commentator for the show.
Dana White became the world's most famous fight promoter, taking home the MMA award for Leading Man of the Year since 2010 and making the UFC a global phenomenon.
To this day, Rogan remains one of the most influential voices and figures in the UFC commentary team. In 2009, Rogan began a podcast. It was a casual, informal live stream show streamed in his home in California. He called it the Joe Rogan Experience in 2010. Although he started it casually, the podcast took a surprising twist, becoming so successful, acceptable, and popular all over the US. Joe Rogan, the host of the podcast, has invited different guests to his podcasts. including doctors like Andrew Huberman, scientists like Brian Cox, actors like Miley Cyrus, Kanye West's, including Elon Musk, all with whom he engaged in an open and genuine conversation. These conversations are usually engaging to the audience. In the year 2015, the most popular podcast in the USA was the Joe Rogan Experience. Everyone kept talking about his podcast episodes. Rogan is also set to have a highly anticipated podcast with Donald Trump, one of the U.S. presidential candidates, on the 25th of October 2024 for the upcoming election. In 2020, Forbes listed Joe Rogan as the highest-earning podcaster worldwide, earning about $30 million in yearly revenue through YouTube and sponsorship. Some major sponsors of Joe Rogan's podcast include companies like 1-800-flowers.com, Comma23, and Me, Lyft, Zoom, Stamps.com, Audible, and Lenovo. Who could have predicted that this would happen? But that's not all. In 2020, Joe Rogan struck a groundbreaking $200 million deal with Spotify, making his podcast exclusive to the platform. With the jaw-dropping success, Rogan relocated with his wife and 3 children from Los Angeles to a luxurious $14.4 million mansion on Lake Austin, where he continues to record episodes of his podcast. Despite the financial success of Joe Rogan's Experience podcast, Rogan faced some challenges. For instance, during one of his podcast episodes, in 2021, he made some comments on COVID-19 and used some racially insensitive words. These incidents led to criticism and backlash, including a letter from 270 scientists and physicians to Spotify in 2021. In response, Spotify added content advisory warnings to relevant episodes. But the company chose to maintain its relationship with Rogan. During another controversy in 2022, Rogan publicly apologized for his past comments and had 70 episodes removed from Spotify. Despite all of these setbacks, the Rogan Experience podcast remains one of the top podcasts that is listened to worldwide. The podcast boasts 14.5 million followers on Spotify and 17.5 million YouTube subscribers. What do you think about Joe Rogan's kind act towards the robber and his family? If you found yourself in such a situation, would you offer kindness to a robber who robbed you? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.